Hi, my name is Krish, and my story, as Justina might have alluded, has nothing to do with Peace Corps, but I was born in Madras, now called Chennai, in India. And we moved out here as a family when I was 3 months old, so I don't have a lot of experience with my initial few months in India, or at least nothing that I remember. And on the other hand, we'd actually go back every few years to India to visit my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. And it was just great growing up with them. You know, a lot of my cousins were the same age as me, so I have a lot of fond memories. It just wasn't what I might call the typical Indian experience that I'd see depicted in movies and television. You know, to put it another way, my experiences were nothing like what one might expect if they were to watch or see the transcendental experiences that Gandhi went through in the movie Gandhi. You know, that's not to say that India didn't have things that were distinct or that things about it were distinct in my mind. I remember stepping out of the airplane into the airport and just being greeted with the humidity immediately. And then the smells. I think that's a bit of sweat, a touch of cumin, some sandalwood, and that would linger in my suitcases when I opened them up on the way home, like this little sealant, you know, just coming out to greet me on my return. But from the airport, I'd be whisked away in my uncle's van, air-conditioned, into an air-conditioned room in their home, complete with servants, great food, and satellite television. Now, I still remember my first trip to India in which satellite television had been introduced, and a bunch of the older relatives in my grandparents' generation, who will all remain nameless, were gathered around the television watching Baywatch. And they do this week after week after week, watch different episodes of Baywatch. And I remember one of them came up to me later, and he said, "Krishna, that Pamela Anderson, fantastic actress, fantastic. Has she won an Emmy Award?" And yeah, that's why you're watching it. And if that weren't enough entertainment, we'd sometimes leave the house as well. But whenever I'd leave the house to experience Chennai or other parts of India, it was always with either family or some sort of chaperone. And I didn't think any of this was odd until I got into college. And when I got to college, what had changed? Well, what had changed was my cousins. A lot of them had actually come out to the United States to pursue further studies. Some of them had started day jobs. So I would spend my days at home in either my aunt or uncle's house, and I'd grow a little restless. I could occasionally play cards with my grandmother, and there was some fun in that. "Krishna, why'd you put down a Jackie of Clava when you could have put down a king? That's just not right." You know, but after a while playing cards, you know, were at its welcome too. And I wanted to go exploring. And unfortunately, whenever I did, I was kind of, there was a lot of protocol there. It was always with a chaperone. And if I did go out, there was kind of a rule, you know, "Krishna, just don't say anything and give yourself away." Because to speak would be to identify myself as an American, where physically I might be decoyed or mistaken for an Indian. If I were to out myself as an American, they know, wherever I'm at, they know that they can charge American prices for anything. So to speak was to pay a higher price. So it was best if Krishna experienced India as silently as possible, seen but not heard, and confined to close quarters. I did feel a bit like Rapunzel without the hair. Now, what started to change as well was then I started grad school, and I started traveling the world for conferences, and I was experiencing other parts of the world. And it was in contrast to this sort of confined life that I had experienced when visiting Chennai or seeing my relatives, where their impression of me was, "Oh, you're just not street smart," you know? That was their impression of me. But I was gaining that confidence in exploring different cities internationally, and I just mentioned that to my girlfriend at the time, and she said, and she'd actually grown up in India, so she was kind of surprised and said, "Why not treat, you know, India the same way you treat anywhere else?" So that idea was in my head, and I went back. It was December of 2008, and I went back to Chennai. My aunt picked me up from the airport, and she asked me, you know, what did I want in this trip? And I said, "Well, I'd love to experience India the way you do." And she said, Krishna, what do you want? I mean clothes, I mean food. Like, no, I really just want to experience India the way you do. I'd love to drive a manual transmission car on Indian streets. I'd love to navigate my way through Chennai. I'd love to explore other parts of India on my own. And I could just see that Krishna transform into, just terror. It's like I'd open Pandora's box. And they were like, Hope! We have to save Hope! We have to save Hope! And they were trying to shut it, but my relatives were trying to be as supportive as possible in the constraints of, okay, we can let him do some of this, but he can't get too crazy. So my parents had actually come out to India with me at that point in time. And my dad agreed to give me driving lessons. Now, I remember my first time driving with my dad, and it was a nightmare, so I was actually prepared for the worst. But it was actually a surprisingly good experience. He borrowed my uncle's car keys and took me out on the road. I'd never driven a manual transmission car, but within a couple hours, I was driving clutch and I was navigating Chennai streets in one of the busier neighborhoods, T Nagar. So, with that under my belt, I felt like, oh man, I can drive in India. Surely I can just travel out on my own. So one fine day, a few days later at my aunt's place, I just kind of said, hey, I'm going out. I said it. I didn't ask for permission. I just left. And I found myself on the streets. And a few blocks in, I just kind of looked around and I realized, wait a second, this part of Chennai is a bit of a labyrinth. A lot of the streets ended at dead ends and all the houses looked the same. I was lost. And my heart was pounding a bit faster. I'm trying to navigate my way through this maze, and I eventually wind up on a main road. And there's a convenience store there. And I think I'm starting to get my bearings again, and I kind of know where I am. And I think to myself, well, I've never purchased anything on my own. Why don't I go in there and try that out? So I walk in, and I notice that they have these chocolate bars, 5-star. So I go up to the clerk and I say, the 5-star avlo, which basically is, how much is that 5-star bar? And he responds with the price. And at that point, I don't know why, I'm just too nervous to say anything else. So I just kind of fiddle around. I want to give him exact change. So I just kind of awkwardly hand him the money. Look at him. All right, we're good. Yeah, I can leave. Great. And then I put it back in my pocket, and I make my way back into the maze, and somehow find my way back to my aunt's place. All this independence and discovery, and I'm greeted at home. Why'd you buy chocolate? We're about to have lunch. We've already bought you chocolate. Don't you like what we provided you? And I'm just greeted with this old-fashioned scolding for my adventurousness. And so everyone reacts this way except my grandmother. And my grandmother's the only one who basically takes out a piece of chocolate, puts it in her mouth, says, thanks for the chocolate. So with this, the question is, well, now I kind of want to explore even more because my curiosity's been whetted. So my appetite's been whetted. So I suggest traveling on my own in Chennai, and they're absolutely against me doing that because they say, oh, you'll have to take an auto rickshaw, and that's dangerous. An auto rickshaw, if you don't know what that is, it's basically a 3-wheel scooter with a frame and a back seat that's cushioned to look like a mini taxi, except there aren't any doors on the side, so you could actually fall out. But what they're more concerned about was that I might get fleeced. So I agree not to take an auto rickshaw. What they do agree for me to do is to actually travel to Bangalore. Now, that's another town in another part of India, but it's kind of like India's Silicon Valley, as in it's incredibly gentrified. Most people there speak or understand English, very easy to navigate, and my uncle's there to greet me. And my uncle likes to quiz me and just ask me random trivia, and he says, do you know what black gram is? I'm like, no. He's like, you don't know what black gram is and you want to go exploring Bangalore on your own? That's his reaction, but for some reason he's willing to leave me on Mahatma Gandhi Road, MG Road, for a few days. And I somehow navigate my way back with a rickshaw. And I relay these experiences to my aunt, and she says, well, yeah, that's just because Bangalore rickshaw drivers are lame, and the Chennai ones are ruthless, so whatever you do, don't negotiate with the Chennai one. So I say, okay, fine. And she's all set to pick me up the next day from the bus depot in Chennai. So I say, okay, fine. So I get to the bus depot, but I get there at 4 a.m. I was supposed to arrive at 6 a.m. I have 2 hours on my hands. I'm contemplating what to do. I have a cell phone. I could call, but it's 4 a.m. I don't want to wake anyone up. I could walk it. I do know how to walk it. But then I see this auto rickshaw driver, and he's staring at me. Asks me, where are you going? And I tell him where I'm going. I give him the address, and I also give him some context. The Vinayakar Koval Pakatlairkar. And so we start on this little negotiation. He gives me a price, 100 rupees. I start walking away, trailing with my suitcase, and we haggle down. I say Mupati Rua, which is 30 rupees. He laughs. I eventually haggle him down to 40 rupees, and we go on this trip. I'm back home, and my mom and aunt ask me how I got back. I say rickshaw, and they look at me and they say, how much did you pay? And my response is, I'm not telling you. And my aunt just looks at me and she says, if you paid any more than 50 rupees, you paid way too much.